There we go. Class 3 inside Unit 2. We're going to go over Chapter 4, which is classes. I think a couple people put in there, I don't know where in Discord, but I've seen them where like this is the biggest kind of concept that you absolutely need to know for object-oriented programming, which Java is an object-oriented programming language. So classes is probably the most important for a beginner to really understand. So today will be important. And then it's so important, in fact, that on Thursday we'll hit it again, but with a couple extra stuff in there too. So I'll go over some vocabulary, of course, in the slides. We'll go over some examples, some live coding. I do have a decent amount of examples that I want to kind of show. So hopefully we'll have enough time for that. I also want to give time to do a graded assignment number 1 intro. You're not supposed to be, like, if you didn't start it before today, you're right on target. I would not have even looked at it too much until today. Let me do the intro today. Let me show you what it's about. Let me show you some good starting out points and like how you should approach it. And then after today, go after it, start working on it. And again, it's not due for, I think, 2 weeks. I think I added less than 20 lines of code. So it's not like one of those long assignments, as in like you got to code a lot, as much as they give you a whole bunch of already made code and you have to understand what it's doing to then be able to add your code. So time-wise, it'll still take you some time, but adding lines of code, it won't take you as long. What I like about that is that simulates more of what you would do in an actual job. I don't sit and write brand new code often. I'm usually, finding where things are at, and 80% of my job is just finding what I need to add and where I need to add it, and like how to do that. And then there's only about 20% of it that's actually adding the code. So this graded assignment, even though it will be a little frustrating because you're not used to doing that yet, that's more real world. And then the studio, I'll talk about the studio, but as we have class, we're going over classes today and classes tomorrow, just a prelude for the studio. You actually will not be really coding a lot today that will actually like run, but it'll set it up so that on Thursday, you'll use the same exact code for Thursday, and then you'll build it on Thursday to run. So, right. I picked up 2 Q&A things from Discord, and I'm going to try to explain these. So since our code is in the same package, why don't we use protected rather than public? As a general rule, if you use protected first and then you want to expand it, it's really hard. So usually the principle is either you want nobody to touch it, or you want at least some people to touch, or some code to touch it and be able to access it. And very rarely do I see people actually segment their code where this section of code is all in the same package. So we're going to do protected so that other things inside the same code base can't touch it. I don't see that very often. Can you do that? Absolutely. But I have not seen but maybe 1 or 2 places where I've ever seen protected, and it's usually just that one programmer that, just like the people here, well, why don't we use it? You can use it, but if you just do public and private, but really, really understand when you're going to use public and private, that's all you need to know. Don't focus too much about protected. Yeah. And then somebody was asking, so we have like this teacher class, this course class. Do we put the teacher in the course, or the course, like each teacher has courses? So that's kind of like a circular logic there. This is where you should never have logic that is circular, never. On the other hand, is there one way that's better than the other? Sometimes, and sometimes not. It depends on what the purpose of your program is. So I would always decide before you're doing this. This is talking about like designing, your data. Is your teacher going to be in your course? Like, is your teacher's going to be standalone things that then you're going to put inside of a course? Or your course is going to be standalone and you're going to put your teacher inside your course? It really doesn't matter which way you do it. The other harder part for me on this, when you get into actual programming, usually we are not creating new teachers and courses in lines of code like we are now. We have to do it because we don't know any other way to do that. Just like we're using a scanner to bring in user input because we don't know any other way to do that. When we get to teacher and course stuff like this, worry more about that whenever we actually add the database in and get into Spring, because Spring handles your data management stuff for you. So then we will go over this concept later whenever we get into Spring and into database, because usually we're not typing in our teacher name and course. That's getting stored in a database and we're pulling it from the database. And since your database is already set as a structure, then your class has to match, the class structure has to match your database structure, and they just work together. So that is actually a great question to ask, and it's a good concept to be thinking about. Like, whenever things interact, well, they could go either way. Absolutely understand that. And I will bring that up again when we get more to database. But for now, just do it one way, not both ways. I'm actually into vocabulary and stuff. I'll talk about the repo for assignment 1 later. So a lot of vocabulary. There's these classes, fields, which are like variables. We also call them properties. And then the methods are the functions. When we talk about creating an instance, that is creating an actual object of the class. So classes are made to be blueprints. If I have a person, I know that every person should have a first name, last name, maybe a date of birth, age, whatever else you want in there. And since I know every person has those things, I can create my person class to have these fields. Every day, every time it comes to your birthday, I can create a method that on that day, it increases your age by 1. So that's an action. So methods are actions that you're taking on. And so those are classes, they're blueprints. When I say instance, then I'm not talking about person as an vague object. When I'm talking about instance, I'm talking about Philip. So whenever I create a person and I create a person that's tangible, that's an instance of that class. We do see that this keyword pop up. I'll tell you when is appropriate to use it and when's kind of not when we get to live coding. But generically, in constructors, you'll see this keyword a lot. But almost everywhere else, I guess with setters, you might see this keyword, setters and getters. But other than the setters and the constructor, you want to kind of stay away from this keyword. And I'll explain more of that later in live coding. Access modifiers. I kind of did a prelude last time. So public means that it's accessible anywhere. Inside the package, outside the package, another code base could technically access it if you import it into that code base. On the other hand, private cannot go out of that class or file. We usually do 1 class per file. You can do multiple classes per file, but it's in Java, you just don't. So in Java, you have 1 class per file, and then you can say private inside those classes. And if it's private, that means that you cannot directly access those things outside that file or class. And then protected, and again, I'll show this again in the live code. If it's in the same package, which remember packages are like where they are in a directory. So in the file structure, if they're in the same folder in your code base, then protected, all the things inside that folder can see each other. But if it's outside that folder, then protected won't let you see outside that folder, or let things outside that folder see inside that class in that folder. So protected keeps it at the package level, and remember, package level is like a folder. Encapsulation, this is the whole point of object-oriented programming, is encapsulation. What it means is if I have some kind of action, I don't want to repeat it over and over. So if I know that every person on their birthday gets 1 year older, then I'm going to create a function on that person, not just somewhere else. I'm going to put it in the person class to say, hey, when you hit the birthday, up their age by 1. So that encapsulation means that outside the class, it's just going to be there for you to handle. We'll continuously talk about encapsulation, but it's harder to kind of talk about without some concrete examples. You guys have already been communicating about setters and getters. Some of you have learned the shortcut already. I'm going to show you that. It's actually in the textbook for the next one. So for classes part 2, they actually tell you how to use the shortcut in IntelliJ, but I'll show you. Constructors. So whenever you create a person, you can set up how you want it to get created. If you do not set a constructor, then it's just going to create a very generic one. It's going to know that you want a person, but it's not going to be able to put a name and an age and all that kind of stuff unless you want it to, and then you have to create a constructor that allows you to do that. So constructors are like, how do you want to create this new person that you made? And that the default constructor is, we'll let you make a person, but we're not going to let you customize it. So the default one is that you're not allowed to customize anything. So that's why we usually do write our own constructors. Overloading, I think it's more for the next lesson, but because we're talking about constructors, I'm going to talk about overloading whenever we talk about constructors. So I just wanted to go ahead and bring it up here. You can do overloading with methods, which I'll explain more on Thursday, but overloading on constructors, well, sometimes whenever you create a person, you know their first name and their last name, but maybe you don't know their date of birth yet. You could create a constructor that says, hey, if I pass in their first name and last name, go ahead and create a person, just keep their birthday kind of blank until I add it later. You could also have another constructor that you can, as you're creating the person, have their first name, last name, and date of birth all at the same time. You could have a constructor, an empty one or a default one, that just allows you to create a person and not give any information about it, and then you add it later. So all of those are options depending on how you want your code base to run, but you can actually have multiple constructors, and how the code knows which constructor you're using is based on what parameters you're throwing in. And I'll show you a little bit more about that during the live code, so that'll cement it in a little bit more, but you can have a constructor and it'll know which of those to pick from. And then the whole thing about object-oriented programming with encapsulation, I just want you to hear the vocabulary of the single responsibility principle. It's that dry method that we've always been kind of talking about. You want to write any code that you have to figure out where in the code base is the most efficient for your code, so you're not writing it several times and it's not in an unneeded place. Like you're purposely putting code so that it follows the single responsibility principle. Like normal, pretty short on the lecture, but on the slides, but we're going to go into live coding. All that other stuff at the beginnings. Normal, and then graded assignment. I think it says 3 weeks, but it's 2 weeks. I forgot to update that. But I am going to do an intro today. So I think it's due, 2 weeks from today. And again, do not turn it in late. Jamarco says that he's not going to kick you out if you turn it in late, but don't turn it in late. These spiral very fast if you don't turn them in on time or within a day of their due date. So just turn it in on time. All right, we're going to do some live coding. Before I do that, no, I'll come back to it. I was going to show you that GitHub link, but let me zoom in. Okay. Yeah, the vocabulary of an instance, I'll tell you in live coding. And somebody else kind of explained this. So somebody was asking about public and private versus like, is that like global and local variables? Usually global and local variables are still within one file. So global variables you don't access outside the file. They're still within that file, where local variables are maybe within a method or a subsection of that file, where these are oftentimes you are writing multiple files. So one of the struggles right at the beginning is already this is day 3 and I already have like I don't know how many different files over here already. That's because I'm segmenting, and instead of creating these in the same file and just putting them on top of each other, I'm creating these in separate files. And that's part of what object-oriented and Java really talk about, is everything should be separate in separate files. So instead of doing global variables as like one file, now we're talking about, well, these files have to communicate with each other. So that's where the public and private come in, is public allows those files to communicate, and private says, I only want that to stay inside here. And I will show better examples of that and talk through that. If I remember right, so just follow along with my logic because it's very sporadic today. I think the student and the student practice is what I kind of want to focus on today. So I'm going to call certain things by names. I don't know if these are like the valid names or whatever else. I have heard other programmers call them by these, but there are classes. Like this is a class student, and whenever I say class, this is what I'm referring to by a class. Now, on the student practice, it says public class, right? It says it's a class, and it is by definition a class, but I call this a runner class. And that's because this is where I'm running my code at. So if I'm creating an object to pull in, that's just a normal class. If I ever say the runner class, that means the class that I can actually hit this green button and hit the run. So just know that that's my vocabulary. I've heard other people say similar things, but that's what I'm going to be saying throughout this. So anytime I have a program, I have to have a main method that holds my runner class. Whenever we get to actually true APIs in like Spring, I won't call it really a runner class anymore because it won't do the same thing. We'll structure our code slightly different for that. But for this, anytime I'm adding a new student or printing a line or any of those kind of things, this is my main method or my runner class. So in the student practice, I think it wanted you to instantiate a student. So I instantiated this student here, but let's actually go into the student and see what this is about. So I'm going to be very honest. I think all I did, yeah, I know what I think this stuff was already given kind of to you. And then I just right-clicked. This is that shortcut that people were talking about. I right-clicked and I hit generate. And you can generate all of these different things. This equals and toString is what we're actually going to talk about on Thursday. But we can generate. It'll generate for us either constructors or getters and setters. So I can create a constructor and say, well, what do I need for the user to tell me to create an object of this type? And I just selected all 4. That's why all 4 of them are there. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the setters and getters. So I think that's all I did with their code is I said generate setters and getters, and I just selected all of them, and I hit OK. And then I went over to my student practice, and I said, hey, and I more or less copied and pasted what was in the example. I want to create a new student. And then this thing, I did this, but I can print out whatever I want to. I'm going to hit run here. It's going to run. It's going to print out my name. I said name, but name and ID, but that's because I told it what to say. So that's all I did for the example to get it to run. Once you learn the structure of like setting up these classes and doing the public void main and then setting this up, it will never set up for you. So you have to do these, but I'm pretty sure LaunchCode did these for us. And then everything else, IntelliJ is like, hey, I know what things usually look like. There's several things that I want to talk through. I'm trying to figure out which one makes sense right now. Okay, I think the best one that makes sense right now is this public versus private. This is the big difference between Java and JavaScript. Whenever we were in JavaScript, to get my student name, I could have done just student.name. And whenever I try to do that, it says that it has a private access in student. So because my name, I'll make these. Because my name right here is private, I cannot get my name here. If I make this public, it now allows me to get my name right here. So the private and public allow this class, this file, to this runner file to actually access anything that's public. But if it's private, it will not allow any other file to access this thing directly. That is how Java is meant to be. If you came in to an interview or coded with me and you put this as public and pulled it like this, I would not hire you as a Java programmer. It's just not how we do things. Now, the biggest question is why, because that's very important here. Whenever I make this name public, what that allows me to do is it not only allows me to get the name, but it allows me to set the name. So if I make this public, it'll allow me to set the name and retrieve the name. Now, some of you might be, well, that's what I want. And that's fine on certain things, but let's say that once I have especially with like ID, once you set an ID, you don't want anybody really changing that. So if I change this to public, my ID, now I can actually set my student ID to be whatever I want to, but my student ID should never change. The only way to protect that is to make this private, but then if I make this private, I cannot retrieve it. If I make this private so I can't change it, which that's what I want, now I can't actually retrieve it. I can't get it. So that's where I come down here and for me, I'm going to allow them to get the student ID, but I need to, by a good programming practice, I need to delete this set student ID because I don't want them to set it. So I can just delete that. What that now allows me to do is on my variables, it allows me more control over, do I want to allow them to set it? Do I want them to even be able to retrieve it, to get it? Or do I only want one, or do I want both? And now I have full control over that because I'm going to set it private up here, And then down here, that's where I'm going to allow the public, other classes, to be able to get it. Right. I will still go over more examples. So yes, if generically, if you have a class, let's say 98% of the time, your variables, your fields, are going to be private every single time by default. Without thinking, all of these need to be private. And then individually, you need to create either getters or setters on each of these, depending on what you want. So my name, if once I set my name, I don't want anybody to be able to change my name. Let's go back to what I had originally. That was good. Okay, so this is good code. Let's say that once I set my name, I don't want to be able to set it again. I can just delete that, and now I'm not allowing them to set it. So for instance, if I go over here and say student dot set name to Billy, right now it'll let me do it. So whenever I run this, it changed it to Billy. But if I delete this, set name, now you can see IntelliJ is smart enough to tell me I can't do that anymore. And then whenever I run this, it's going to give me a huge error that says method set name. Doesn't like it. So that is the main purpose of keeping variables private, and then you make the methods, the setters or the getters, public. If you want them, you get to choose that. Passwords are way different. So I won't rope that into this. We will talk about passwords later, but not right here. Yeah, and some people are answering each other. Yeah, anything that's private, we can't access it. So if I set this thing to private up here, it's going to throw a huge error. Like it won't let me do any of these student things because it won't let it to be accessible. So, oh, okay. Hopefully that's just that's the basics. I still have plenty other stuff that I want to talk about. Okay. Okay. Still trying to make sure I'm answering all the questions. Okay. So then somebody asked about shadowing. That's perfect. So you see this name, this student ID, this number of credits. I could. You get to do whatever you want to in your program. I mean, you're the one that makes the program. I could make this I could do this. Why is it not liking those? I don't know if that's a problem or not. Oh, it's already defined. Oh, because I have a string int and an int. Right. So I could write this code. This code is valid code. It does nothing different than what it was before, and I don't have to use the keyword this at all. What I want you to make sure that you're seeing, though, these are in purple. IntelliJ is doing that for you to show you that those are talking about the class variables up at the top, the global variables for this class. So these are in purple. The problem comes if I say name and I say name, this is where it doesn't know which name I want to set. Do I want to set this incoming name to the outgoing name? Like, it doesn't know. That's why you have to do the this dot name. Now the question is, well, why do we do that? And if you are just 100% taking something that is coming in and placing it and overriding these things up here, this is absolutely common. Like, you want to do everybody knows when they look at this that you're setting this student's name to whatever name's coming in, this student's ID to whatever the student ID is, this to what's coming in. So this makes sense when you start seeing this all over the place. Whenever you set things, it's the same way. You're going to set this number of credits to the number of credits when you have a setter. Outside of these situations, though, I very rarely see the keyword this. And that's because the thing coming in is not exactly the same thing as what you're wanting to put. I will try to come up with an example of that as we go through, but I can't guarantee that I will. But I have done this several times where if it's just a normal setter, I'll do this right here. This is the easiest thing to do. So to go to the, I'll try to answer this the best I can, but I don't want to dwell on protected. In practice, we rarely use protected because, again, protected, if I look at these things right here, if I can click on it, protected is anything in the same folder. So course, department, student practice, and teacher. If I use protected and private, not private, protected and public, it'll do the same thing within this. But as soon as I do this one, if I make this one protected, none of these can see it. It has to be in the same folder project. So very rarely do we even know of the scope of those kind of things. So very rarely do we ever use protected. I mean, I have seen it before, but none of the teams that I've been a part of really use it. It has to be like if you're dealing with financial information, maybe where that you do have to pass it between a couple classes or do something, maybe use protected. But none of the stuff that I've ever done, I've needed to use protected to protect it any more than, yeah, I'm using public and private. So do not worry about protected. So question was asked. I would never use a setter for this, but I guess you could. The question was, could I do something like, I can't do set, I deleted that one. Let's do one that I did not delete. So GPA. So could I do something like this? You could, but you're calling an extra method to do just a normal assignment. Do I not have that in here? I have it right there. This would run. Okay, there the red thing went away. You technically could do this. I would never do this. The computing power that it would take to look inside this method, pass this in, and then do the same exact thing that I'm doing, it's just extra code. You don't need to do that. So there's always the can you and should you. Right. The other thing, here's where I was going to talk about overloading. Let's say that I want to set up a brand new student, and so a student has to have a name and an ID. but if they're brand new, they won't have credits or a GPA. So what I've done here, well, LaunchCode technically, but this is common practice. These are default values. So if you do not pass these in, these are the values that they would take. So there is 100% of time that I would want to set a constructor. So I'm going to do this generate constructor, and all I care about is the name and the student ID, because these things have to be set. That means if I wanted to create a student over here, well, let me do this beforehand. So I'm going to delete this for a second. Let's say that I wanted to create a student. And let's say that I only wanted to put in first name and a student ID. Well, this says it expects 4 things going in, but I only gave it 2. So these have to match, or IntelliJ will tell you that you're doing something wrong. So if I go back here and put this back in, and I said name and student ID, I have a name and a student ID, so now it likes it. Because I set default values for these 2, it will also not give me an error if I wanted to print out student 2's name and student 2's ID. It's going to give me those, but I could also print out the GPA. Oh, not student 1, not student 2. There we go. So the student 2 GPA, Billy's GPA is 0.0, but that's because I set it up here. If you do not set a default value, some lovely things happen. By default, a double, if I just assign a double because it's a primitive data type, the default double is 0.0. The default int is 0. So these are going to be a set by default, but I could set the default to whatever I wanted to. And now it becomes that default value if I do not assign it. Now in this case, they need to earn that GPA, so it needs to be 0. The other thing that you might have seen in the book, and this is very common, not very common, this is a common practice. If I have a constructor right here that already assigns the name and student ID, and then do you see how lines 8 and 9 are the same as 13 and 14? When it's this small, I usually don't see this, but you might have objects that have 12 different things that you're passing in. So sometimes what I would see, is it just this? I think it is just this. What this does is it calls this thing and knows to set these things. I think that was in the book, right? Did they do that? Yeah. Right. In my opinion, you do in this course, you never have to do this. Have to. If you want to do it, go ahead. But you never have to do that. If you have a constructor, you can just be very definite and define it every single time. Like this would work for me every single time. If you're talking about starter class, if you're this runner class, this depends on your application. So whenever we get to spring, this thing right here will be 1 line every single time, and it'll never deviate from that 1 line. It starts up the program, and that's all it does. Every other class besides that well, not every other. Anytime you're talking about objects, like something that you want, like a blueprint, you're going to create exactly like this. You're going to say public class. You're going to say what fields matter. You're going to set whatever constructors that could be used. Like, do you want, when you get a student, do you want all 4 things that have to be there? Or is 2 of them fine? You get to set that up, and it'll know based on what you pass into it, which of these to use. And then you have to assign the setters and the getters that you want. That is common practice anytime you want a blueprint of anything that you're going to reuse, like a student. And, so I went over why we use these getters and setters rather than directly accessing. Right. There are things like this. Let me close these out. Where you might have a course that you want to enroll students in, like this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, how do I want to generate? Every course needs to have a name. Let's say it has to have a department, a teacher, and I'm going to say that it needs to at least, well, I guess it doesn't have to have students at the beginning. So I'm not going to select that one. I'm going to say, okay. So this course, to create a new course, which I'm going to use the student practice runner for this. To create a new course, I need the name of the course, the department that it's going into, and the instructor, which of course the instructor has to be a teacher. Now, what I did to just understand that you could have a department as its own object, we can do that. Because of time and what I want to do, I'm actually going to go back on that because I'm going to show you something different. So I'm just going to delete this thing. And then I'm just going to make this a string. Right. So when I create the course in the runner, I need a name, a department, and an instructor. So that means before I create a course, I also need a teacher. So in this one, I want first name, last name. I'm going to make this easy. So subject, I'm not going to do, well, sure. But I'm going to show you how fast this is. Once you get going, I'm just going to create a constructor. I'm going to make sure that it just does all of those. I'm also going to do all the setters and getters just to get the code going here. Again, we've talked about how, let's say that I don't want them to be able to set their first name after they've already set it. I can just delete that one. But for this, I'm just going to keep rolling. I'm going to have a teacher. What I like about IntelliJ, it tells me as I go through here what I kind of need to put in. So first name, last name, subject, and years of teaching. How did I click? So whenever you go to generate and you go to here, it tells me right now I can't do it because I already have all of them. So if I do setter and getter right now, it says no fields without a setter and getter. So if I went ahead and just deleted all these and did it again, setter and getter. And so I just click on these to highlight which ones I want. If I want multiple, so this is a shortcut in most programs. If you either hold shift or control, so shift does beginning all the way to end. Control allows you to click individually if you hold shift or control as you click. So if you didn't know that, a lot of programs allow you to do that. So I created this history teacher. Now I want to be able to create a course. Now remember, whenever I first create a course, this is going to be then I'm going to see, okay, the name, it's going to be World History. What's the next thing? Come on, pop up. Department. And I changed that just to a string so it doesn't do any validations. And then the teacher. So the teacher is going to be the history teacher that I just created. So now I have a course. And now I want to put these students in there. But whenever I go to my course, I can get enrolled students. But I didn't make any setters or getters for any of this stuff yet. So if I'm talking about a course, I want to make it so that once I set the name, I'm not going to change it, but I do want to be able to get it. So I do want to set a setter for name, or not a setter, a getter. I want them to be able to access it. So a getter for both the name and the department. I think if the teacher's horrible, I'm okay firing the teacher. So I'm going to do a setter and getter for the teacher. Now here's the weird part about the courses or the students. I don't want to do a normal setter for the students, because if I do a normal setter, I have to set all of the students all at the same time, because that's what a setter does. It's an all or nothing thing. But since I have an array list, instead of doing a normal setter, I'm going to have to create my own function to add students. But I do want to do the getter. So I'm going to do the getter of the enrolled students. So this will allow me to get all of that stuff. So I added a constructor. I kind of went through most of those. So the method that I don't have is a public add students. Add student. I'm only doing one. What am I returning? I'm not going to return anything. What am I passing into it? I want to pass in one student that I'm going to call student. So instead of setting the whole entire array list, what I did was I created this, just add one student at a time. And I could have maybe an add students, where then I would have an array list of students. I'm not going to code this one, but you could have this, where you could throw in an array list of a bunch of students and then add a bunch of them all at the same time. You get to code this however you want to. Again, I'm not going to do that one. I'm going to just add one student at a time. And remember, on an array list of adding, first of all, I want to add to this thing. So I'm going to say enrolled students.add student. So this should add whatever student I throw in to the enrolled students. I'm reading through the questions. Hold on. I did click all the fields. I did that. Why did I use in course? Why did I say that I wanted it to be a teacher here and not just a string? If you wanted it to be a string, that's fine. I'm just showing you that these can be objects. They can be whatever you want to. And when we start actually putting a database on the back side of this, it will make a lot more sense, because we might have a teacher database that has all of our teachers that are already structured for us. And so instead of just putting in a name, it's going to put that whole entire teacher object in that course. So if it's something that's repeatable, meaning I'm going to have multiple teachers potentially in this school, then I'm going to make this a teacher class, and it's going to attach that whole entire teacher so that later, if I say, hey, not only who is teaching world history, so not only who is teaching world history, but the teacher that's teaching world history, what is there? How many years have they been teaching? I'm going to try to show that for you so that I can, that'll make more sense here in a second. All right, teacher, I said add student, not teacher, course, enrolled students. The way that I have coded this is that we have to add the student. So let's do that. So in my runner, I have a course that's world history. And what I want to do is in my world history class, I want to add a student. And I'm going to do student 1. And then in my world history class, I want to add a student, and it's going to be student 2. And then what I'm going to do is I want to, I don't know if this will be pretty or not, but hopefully it'll work. And actually, it probably won't work because I almost purposely did something that I think that won't work, but we'll see how it goes. So I'm going to run this. The only thing that should print out is my enrolled students. Let's go ahead and it should say the name of the class and the enrolled students. So let's see. Yeah, it says here that something's wrong. I wish it told me a better log. Oh, here it is. Hold on. There's a null pointer exception. This is one of the things that you're going to see a lot. That's one of the reasons why I did this. Null pointer means at some point I did not set up something correctly, or I'm trying to call something that doesn't have anything set in it. And in this case, it is the add student. It does not like that. So right here, whenever I say, hey, add this student, it's going to go to the course, and it's going to say, hey, enrolled students, add this student, and it cannot do this. And that goes back to, well, what is an enrolled student? It's an array list, but anytime I have an object like this, I need to set it up. Anytime you have an object, when this is not a string or a double or an int, you have to have this new keyword. Well, then someone might ask, well, what about teacher? Teacher's an object, and I don't have a new keyword here. Very valid question. But this teacher is passed in right here. And this thing right here is passed in by this history teacher. And if I go to this history teacher, it says new teacher. So at some point, you have to set up a new object every single time you want to do an object. Again, if it's a string or a double or some of those more basic things, you don't have to do that. But with all custom objects and array lists, you have to use that new keyword. Now, I think this should work now. Yep. It still does something weird. Here's another thing that I wanted to make sure you guys saw. It printed out world history just fine. World history.getName. It's a string. That Java knows how to deal with that. It prints out world history. Over here it says student, but it doesn't actually tell me my students. It says student and student. It identifies that they're students. You will see this in Java quite a bit. If you have an object that's not a string or a double or an int or some of those primary things, it will always print out where this is going to print out where that student is located in memory. So I know that doesn't make a huge amount of sense, but if you remember from last week, I said that if you have an object, all that object is holding is a memory location. And then when you say, hey, go to that student, it says, oh, I know where the student is held at. And it actually goes over in this other place where the student is held at. That's how Java works. The reason why, whenever I set up a student, it doesn't know how much memory to allocate. So it goes over where it's more flexible and where it can hold as much whatever I want to. And it does all of its stuff over there. It's storage over there. But then actually in the working memory, like in that short-term memory, all it does is it holds this thing right here. And this is what we would call a pointer to that actual student. In other programming languages like C++, you actually like have to set the pointer and go get the pointer. And some of those more basic programming languages, you have to do all that for you. Like you have to program that. Where Java, you do not program that. The only downfall is you do have to understand how to get them. So if I wanted to say get enrolled students, this is going to return me an array. And if I said, this is where Java gets all these chaining methods. So I'm going to walk through this. This is the history. This is your enrolled students, but remember this returns an array. It says in an array, I'm going to get the 0th element. That's this thing right here, which is an actual student. And whenever I get back that student, I want you to go get the name of it. It knows that the 0th student, the first element in the list is Philip. If I said, go get the first, it would say there's Philip and Billy. Hopefully you guys remember that you can actually do a loop. So I could do for each student. I'm going to do S here because I'm already using student. I'm going to change this. These are bad variable names. Student 1 and student 2 are bad names. So just I'm trying to go short. And remember, this is an array list of students. I know I coded this super fast. Hopefully it at least makes sense. I said for each student that's enrolled, for each student, print me out that name. So hopefully this does the same thing. It's Billy and Philip. But this one, if I had a third or a fourth or a fifth or a sixth or 20 of them, it would print them all out. So that's all I'm doing on that. So then the question was, well, what about the teacher? So on the teacher, I can say, hey, go inside the world history class, go get the teacher, go get the instructor. And then, of course, I can print out their first name. So their first name should be Sam. So there's Sam. But because I did it as a teacher object, I can get their first name. I can get the subject that they teach. I can get their last name, and I can get the years that they've been teaching. I can get whatever I want to here. And it attaches more things to this, where if I just said name, or if I just said a string of a teacher name, it'd just be the string teacher name. It wouldn't be everything. The other thing that I want to show you, this is already done in your other one, but let's say with the teacher, I actually do the generate and I do the toString. I'm not going to go into the specifics of this. And I say, hey, whenever I say print me out the teacher, let's go ahead and do all of this stuff. So this toString, I'll talk about what it really is on Thursday. But if you just do the getter method or the generate thing there, whenever I go back here and I say just get my instructor now, okay, I'll do it pre and then post. If I do not have this and I say go get the instructor for the world history class, it's going to do that thing again. It's saying, hey, there's a teacher there, and it's located here, but it doesn't give me back the information that I want. Long story short, if I do this toString method, now whenever I print this thing out, it'll tell me that my teacher has a first name, last name, subject, and years teaching, and it prints all that out for me. So I'll go over that more later, but it at least proves to you, hopefully, that because I set this as a teacher, not a string, it does multiple things. Okay, it gets me all that. Okay, going back to the questions for a second. Anytime you set up an array list, I would just set it up to an empty array list. I don't know what you mean by a utility. That's a vague tool in a vague word in my opinion, so I don't know. Yeah, you got to iterate over the students and then get the names inside them. Instance of a class can have own properties. Yeah, the memory of so technically, if you want to get really, so it's a little too much. Don't worry if you're not understanding a word that I say here. Whenever it does the teacher and then it says the memory, that's technically the pointer to the head of the teacher, and then objects are linked. So like it would know where to go access the next thing. So that's how most memory things are, where it just points to the head of it, and then depending on what object type it is, depends on if it can be scattered across memory and then they show different points and it's all linked, or there's different memory things. Again, almost ignore exactly what I said. That's too much detail, but somebody asked the question. Practice to make a method in the course class. You can shortcut some of this, meaning like if I wanted to print out all of the enrolled students, you could go down here and say, instead of get enrolled students and just returning the array list, you could have a method that's publicly accessible that might be even void that says print enrolled students. You could do something like this and then do all of your system out things and do your loop inside there. I'm wondering if that's what you're asking, but yes, you can create whatever you want to. That's the cool thing. And then because you're putting it on a course, okay, so hopefully this makes sense. Because this course.java is a blueprint, if I have a world history course and an algebra 2 course, it will know that if I do world history dot print enrolled students, it'll only print the enrolled students for the world history. And then if I do algebra 2 dot print enrolled students, it'll only do the enrolled students for the algebra 2. That's the power of having a course as a blueprint set up, is because any action that you want to do on any course, you just say, hey, this is the course that I want to do it to, or that I'm talking about, and then do these things. Yeah, like a print roster method. Absolutely. You can do whatever you want to. Yeah, if you don't know how to fix the pointer issue, if what you're talking about is that it keeps printing out the teacher at whatever, that's because you cannot print an object. When you print an object, it'll print the memory location of it. If you want to print the teacher's first name, you got to say .get first name. You have to go one level deeper, or what we're going to talk about on Thursday is how to actually build a custom, kind of like I did here, a custom toString method for all teacher objects. So now teachers will always print out like this. That's why it says teacher bracket because here's my toString teacher bracket, first name equals, and this is the actual first name. We will talk about this on Thursday, so I'm not going to go too much more into that. Man, just so many other things. I was going to do this grade thing with the protected just to show you that again, or show you that you can have other methods, like if you want to calculate a letter grade, meaning that you type in a %. I don't think that that's worth our time right now. What I want to do is I want to build this library demo. I've already built these, but I'm going to just go ahead and make a new one right in front of you. And we're going to build this. I am going to go a little fast. If you ask questions, I'll try to answer them. So let's say that I wanted to build a library. Right? The first thing that I would build if it was me is something that as my first step in the door, it's going to hold my main class. So I'm going to call it my library runner. Okay? So my library runner is going to have my public static void main. And that's my runner. So whenever I actually create a library, I'm going to create it in here. So the next thing I want to do is create a library. So whenever I create a library, let's see, what does a library have in it? A library has books. We could have a private string name. This would be my library name. And then we're going to have a private, I want some books. So I'm going to have an array list of books. And of course, it does not like that. Because it doesn't know what book is yet. So let me go create a book class. This is what I was talking about that's so much different than JavaScript. Because some of this code's so small, in JavaScript, I would almost just do this in one file, where in Java, you do this in separate files. Like, you're going to have a lot more files in Java, but it will hopefully separate everything. And it's not books with an S. You should rarely have an S at the end of an object or a class. With my book, let's say that I have, I'm definitely going to have a title of my book. I'm going to have an author. And let's, just because I want something other than a string, I'm going to say year, because I'm not, like, whatever year it came out. Oh, you can do ISBN, publishing date, that's what it is. Publish year. All right. Because I want to shortcut this, I'm just going to go here. I'm going to go to generate. Whenever I have a book, I want all of these. I don't ever want to have a book that doesn't have a title or doesn't have an author or doesn't have a published year. So I'm going to create only one constructor there, and it's going to have all of them. And then I'm going to generate the code of setters and getters. I'm going to go ahead and select all of these. What I do is I say, hey, I want everything there, and then I go line by line. I definitely want to get the title. Do I ever want to reset the title? Probably not. I don't need that one. Get author, absolutely. Reset the author. I think the author, once it's set, it's already there. Get publish year, set publish year. I bet you that doesn't change either. So I probably just wanted to do getters in those because I didn't need to actually set. I don't want to reset those. My initial setting is done in the constructor. So that's where I'm going to set it at the beginning. So now I have books. And now it knows what my book is. So that's good. When you're doing an array list, you can initialize your array list right here, or you can initialize it in your constructor, either way. So because I did it up here before, I'm actually going to do it in the constructor this time. I'm going to have my constructor. I'm going to actually have two of them. One is if I already have some books, I'm going to throw the books in there. And then the other one is, well, what if I started a brand new library and I didn't have books yet, but I had a name? So I'm going to do this. But remember, since I did not initialize my books up here, what I need to do down here is books equal new array list here. So again, it needs to be this new array list. You can put it up here, or you can put it down here. Either way is fine. Now, personally, I just put it up at the top. That's what my preference is. But I'm just showing you that it can go down here. Right. Okay. So setters and getters generate. I'm going to go through again. Get name, absolutely. Sometimes the library might change names, like if somebody buys out the library or something like that, we might, so I'm going to leave it there, be able to reset the name. I definitely want to be able to get the books, but again, we have talked about this would be get books that's going to return an array list. I could also do a public, maybe even return the string, or a string array or a string. I'm just going to say void here. But kind of like what we were doing with the teacher and stuff, this would be like for each book. Oh. What did I call it? Books? Yeah. Here we go. So I could say, hey, if I say to get the book title list, it would go through all the books and just print out all the titles. Well, and so you never know when to use void. And that's me personally. I don't like methods that are void, but I'm also, so again, I'm usually trying to return something back to the front end. So I'm in my daily job, I never use system out print line except for debugging and those kind of things. I'm usually returning this. So then I'm trying to think, well, do I want to return an array list of books? Do I want to reformat it and do like a string, and then it will just display the string somewhere else? So that's why I struggle with this, is because that's not how I naturally think in my day job. And then the same thing with set books, would set all of them, but I would definitely want an add book. And this is going to be a book. And then this is going to be books.add book. Right. Checking the questions for a second. Okay. Use the word return. That's a good one. Anytime this is not void, you have to have a return statement, because this thing here is saying what you need to return. I think that's one of the reasons why I'm just going to look at this, even though I didn't use it. Let's say that whenever I did grades, I wanted them to have a percent. And actually, I don't even need to have a letter grade. Sure. On this one, because letter grades are A, B, C, D, and F, I could have a method that says calculate letter grade. If it's above 90%, I'm going to return the char, the character, and I put A. If it's above 80%, then these are else if. So if it was 90, it would return this, and then it would be done. It wouldn't run the rest of the code. Else if it was above this, it would return B, and it wouldn't run the rest of the code. C, D, and then if it's anything under 60, it'd be an F. So this is where you'd have multiple returns, but what you are returning is this variable type, and then it's usually whatever this is. So this says calculate letter grade, so I'm returning the letter grade. On the books here, that has a return of title, it says get title, so I have to return the title, which in this case is a string. And these are real short because I'm not doing any like calculation or manipulation on it. Curtis, that is absolutely where you're supposed to be right now. You should be where you should understand what I'm doing. If you are, and it's not every little thing, but as long as you're understanding the majority of what I've been talking about, and like as I've shown you and talked through and you're understanding it, that's the perfect place to be. The only way to get to the next level is to do it yourself. And that is why Studio is so important. So make sure that you're doing the studio and the exercises on your own to get your chops up. So constructors usually lack a return statement. That is correct. Okay. I'm already running later than I'd really like. So I'm just gonna start throwing things in here. I have this copied and pasted somewhere else, so I'm just gonna go ahead and try to find that real quick. So in my main, this is what I was playing with before. And like this one, I said like library, and I when I was playing around, I was calling it display books. So if I go back here, and I call this display books, it's going to go like that. Is there any other? Oh, it told me my library had to have something, this red thing there, and it says that right now cannot resolve this. It should tell me why. Oh, the candidates for a new library are a name and books, or at least the name. So it's telling me here that you didn't put either a name in books or a name in there. So I got to do that. All right. So I put a name in there. This was working earlier, so I hope it works and we can keep moving on. Oh. So this thing here, it prints out because I said add these 3 books, which are these 3 books, and I said display the books. And the books, I said just to do the titles. And what I could have done is I could have done a toString right here. And then over here, I would not print out just the title, but I would do the whole entire book. And remember, if I'm going to do this again because I think it's that important that you see. If I don't have a generic toString method, when I try to print out the books, it'll say library.book in a memory location. So that's why it's so important to eventually, this is what you're going to be learning before Thursday, is to do this toString. And so now whenever I run this, it'll say, here's my 3 books, and it'll actually print out the stuff there for me. So hopefully going over that kind of twice, one with the student and then with the library, makes sense. I have 2 other things I got to cover. So yeah, to generate the constructors, I just right click you go to generate, and one of the options is constructor. And when you do that, you're able to choose from the fields that are already there, which of these are required to do this. If neither one of them is required, then you can hit select none, and it'll just make a generic one where it'll make a new one. I don't like this option. I would usually like to set at least one of them whenever I'm creating. Last thing, and then I will be done here on this thing. Whenever we do, let's say even get name, because you said get author, and I'm not seeing it right this second, but I guess that's on the book. So whenever you're talking about, and I'll talk about the toString a little bit more, I guess, when you're saying get author here, that is how you're going to actually get the author if you're not in this class. If you're in this class, author is available to you to just use. So when you say get author, you're actually calling that from somewhere else, and then it's going here and it's actually returning the author that's in this class. Same thing down here. That's why I'm not doing get author here, because I have access to author. It's internal to this file. So I'm just going to call the actual variable. I'm not going to call a method that then also calls the variable. That's like doing an extra step in there. All right. I'm going to close out of this so I just don't do that again. So two things. First of all, I'm going to talk about the studio, and then I'm going to talk about the graded assignment. Unfortunately, both of those might take a little bit of time. I want to do the graded assignment last so that those of you that want to look back at the video will just know that it's at the very end of the video and then go back. The studio. First thing I want to note is right here. For this studio, we are focusing on class design for these two classes. You do not need to be concerned with how the classes would be used in an application. And then at this stage, don't think about how the application will work or behave. You should focus on the way the data will be represented with these classes. So are the things a string? Are they an integer? Should they be a hash map? Should they be an array list? Like what are these things that they should be and how they should relate to one another? You will not be actually creating these and running them. You're going to create the two classes, but you will not do anything with like a runner class. Now, for those of you that are a little bit more advanced, if you do that, that's fine. But I'm just setting the foundation here. You are going to create a menu class and a menu item class. And you're going to make it just like I did my student class. Go ahead and type it out, even if it doesn't fully make sense. I already got rid of it. So yeah, like the student class, you had your fields up top, you had your constructor, and then you have your methods. You may want to only have certain setters and getters. You may, want to have different types of constructors depending on what you're doing. So this is more of a thinking through and design and then typing it out. And then what will happen on the next studio is you're going to talk about the design again, but then you're actually going to kind of try to implement it. So you're going to try to actually create menu items and do your menu next week. So really think hard about this, maybe even get a preview of what you're going to do next time so that you can have a good thought process for that. But just know that this week is not you're going to have a workable, runnable code at the end of the studio. That's for after Thursday. Good question. Is there a standard way for setters and getters? Actually, no. In my opinion, if it's just the traditional setters and getters, I push them all the way to the bottom because that's the last thing I want to read. But no, there's no set way. I've done it so that there's setters and then there's getters. But to be honest, I use IntelliJ, and I think it does it based on variables. So it does the setter and the getter for the field, and then the setter and the getter for the field, and the setter and getter for the field. Whatever IntelliJ does, that's what I just run with. But then whenever I create my own custom ones, I either put them all together right underneath the constructor, or I put them all right at the very, very bottom. I usually just go off of whatever my teammates are doing, to be honest. So there is no standard way, but that was a good question. Fine. Graded assignment 1. Usually you can go over here, you go to assignments, you go to assignment 1, and this is the instructions for it. The problem with these instructions, not problem, what's different about these instructions is it does not tell you where the repo is in these instructions. You have to go to Canvas, and this was not here a couple days ago, but it is here now, for the starter code for this assignment using this link right here. So if you checked a couple days ago and it wasn't there, don't think you're going crazy, it wasn't there. This got uploaded recently. But that's where you go to get the starter code to then hit the fork button. So I'm not going to give you guys time to do that. What I want to do is I want to go over the overview of this. What you're going to do, most of this is already set up for you again. It just is. I'm going to briefly go over the code. I'm actually not going to give you enough information to do the full code before the end of class. I just want to get you started. So what I want to do is go over what's all this stuff on the left, and then how I would start. So if I open up all of these things underneath main, here's my Java code. So there's a job data, there's a tech jobs, and then there's a resources. There are 99 lines of different jobs. These are jobs. The first line are the headers, and then the second through 99th line are 98 jobs that they put inside here. Now this is comma separated values. And if I was looking at this originally, I'm like, I don't know how to get this into the format that I need. The good news is they do it for you. The code's already there for you, so you don't have to worry about that part. Job data, if you look, this does not have a main class. This is handling a lot of the data that we're bringing in here. So it already knows where the file is located. It's telling us, is the data already loaded somewhere? It starts off as no, it's not loaded. So if it's not, then I got to load it. It somehow puts these jobs into an array list that also has a hash map inside. So it's an array list of hash maps of key value pairs. It says here, find all, so then it loads the data. It sets a new array list object. It goes over the array list, or goes over the hash map, and then it adds the values. You need to read these, so just know that you're doing this. So find all. But if you see here, there's also another find all. This one's only throwing in arrays. This one's thrown in the array hash map, and this says you're only loading data if you haven't got it. So you will be manipulating this. You'll also be manipulating some of this, but this is fine. I would not do the find by anythings right now. So that's why I'm not going to go over those. Find by, we're not going to do that today. I will show you that later. Here's your load data. This thing right here loads all the data for you. Do not touch this, because it does the CSV, comma, separated value parser, parsing all that data in for you. Puts it into records. Yeah, don't touch this thing down here, this load data. The tech jobs, if you look here, it gives me some play buttons here. So this is what you want to start off with. Look through the code, see what you're doing. Here's your void main. So this is where you're going to start off with. It is going to put column choices inside your hash map. It's also going to put some action choices inside here, which is search and list. You're already while true, so you're just going to keep going. It's going to do this stuff. I'm not actually going to show you all this stuff. The else is if you search. Remember, what I would do right now is not worry about the search. So you're not going to worry about this. I'll talk about this later. Get user selection. You don't have to touch any of this. It's just getting what they have put in. So let's run this, and I'm going to show you kind of what it does. So it says here, welcome to the Tech Jobs app. Do you want to search or do you want to list? Again, do not do search right now. I mean, you can play around with whatever you want to, but your first action should probably do to list. What do I want to do? I want to list. And then what you can do you want to list everything? Do you want to list position type, employer, skill level? I'm just going to list them all. So I'm going to hit 0 here. And it tells me print jobs is not implemented yet. That is what I would work on first. If you work on other things, you won't know if it's right or wrong until you get this thing done. So if you do list all jobs, you want your print jobs to, this is print jobs are not implemented yet. And if you look right here, it says print jobs is not implemented yet. This is what you want to do first. The hard part about this for you guys, you have to iterate over an array list. And then you also have to grab all the entries inside this hash map. Both of those you have done in exercises, but you have not done them at the same exact time. So you will have to have 2 for loops. The outside for loop is going over the array list. The inside for loop is going over the hash map. So to show you kind of what this looks like, if you set a breakpoint right here, this red breakpoint, and instead of running this like a normal run and you do debug, this is so much better than VS Code. When I hit this debug, it's going to pull up this stuff here. And I'm going to do the same thing. I don't want to search. I want to list. And I want to list all the jobs. So I'm going to put 1 and then 0. And it's going to step a breakpoint right here, and it's going to stop. When it stops right here, it'll tell me all the information I have. Here are your sum jobs. Here's all your jobs. There's 98 of them. Remember, there was 99 lines. 1 was a header line. There's 98 jobs here. Inside each of these, they have a position type. They have a name, they have an employer, they have a location, and a core competency. Again, if you want to print these out, you're going to have to iterate over the array list. So you're going to iterate 98 times. But inside each of the objects, each of your hash maps, you're going to have to iterate over all of these entries. Copy and paste from the book. We just talked about it on Monday. There's that like entry for each entry in the hash map or whatever there. That's just copy and paste it. Do not overthink that. If this doesn't show up for you very well, to be honest, I don't usually look down there. I just hover over what I want. If you hover over the sum jobs, it'll say there's 98 of them, and then I can hit a plus button. I can do the same thing right here inside the code, and I can just hover over the variables that I care about. So that's what I do. All right. So goal number 1 is be able to run this program. Goal number 2 is to get it so that you get this to print out by hitting 0 and then, or 1 and then 0. And then your next actual coding is you need to put some loops in here and iterate over things and print some things out. Now then the question is, well, what format should I print these things out at? Well, it tells you in these wonderful tests. So let's go down here to these tests. There's technically only one test class. That's this tech jobs test. So if I do this, there are one, two, three, four tests right here. I know I'm scrolling fast. You're just going to have to believe me. But what they're going to do is they're going to input a 0 and then a 2 and then a buzz bold and then an X. And this X is to stop the program. So don't overthink the X. The X is just to escape or exit at the end. But if you typed in a 0 and then typed in a 2 and then you typed in buzz bold as your input, your output actually runs the program. The expected is this file right here. So this test print jobs.txt is over here, test print jobs.txt. So it's telling me if I hit a 0, a 2, and copy and paste buzzbold in there, it should look like this. Because again, it says this. You don't see the 0, but you'll type a 0 in yours. You'll type a 2, which is an employer. And then if you do buzzbold, it should give you back the position of buzzbold. This is one way to do it. The best way for me to do it is I just run my test. All of these are going to fail. I'm just going to run them. When you run this, because you are doing expected strings, assert equals, there we go. Because you're doing an assert equals, if you go here and you say click to see my differences, it'll tell you it expects, like I showed you before, this one that says buzzbold, but yours says print jobs is not implemented yet. So it's telling you what it expects versus what you gave it, what actually happened. This is how I find what the format should be. The format, you're going to have 5 little asterisks above and below. You're going to have the position type, colon. And remember, the position type is already in the hash map, so you don't have to type that out. And then you have this after the thing. So you're going to have to add that colon in there because that colon won't be there. So this is what you're searching for. So to a realistic timeline is by this weekend, you are able to get not the search ones, because remember how it did search? Which one? You need to be able to print these things out without searching. You need to get that done by this weekend. And then on Thursday, I'll talk a little bit about the search. And then next Monday, I'll really go into how the search functionality works. So I'll help you through that. But this is what you should be doing, is printing something like this. Even if it's not identical, print something like this in this print jobs. All right. Do a little bit of questions, and then I do want to show you working code to show you what this looks like. I think I have it. Oh, looky there, all 4 of my tests passed. So that's what it should look like at the end if all of your tests pass. It usually shows all 4 of them there, but I guess it doesn't. Fine. And then the other thing is I want to run my tech jobs. So this is the functionality that should happen. If I say that list and then print all of them, it just printed 98. You can see that there's a ton of them, 98 jobs, and they print just like this. I can also list the skill, and it'll just list all the skill values. The good news for you, you don't have to code that. That one should also just work. Right? The thing that you need to do is print the total jobs, list employer. It'll say all the employers. So the one that you're focusing on now is listing all, and you should have something like this where it prints all these things out. And then the other functionality is search. Now, whenever I search, I can search like all, and then type in like Kansas, and it'll give me anything that has Kansas in it. I think it should also be case insensitive. So if I said all again, and I did something alternating, it still gives me these. So it does have to be case insensitive, but all of these have Kansas in the name of them. All right. Hopefully that explained the functionality. Again, your job right now is not for the search, but it's to list, and it's to list all the jobs. I'm going to stop the recording.